At 07:42 a.m., June 3rd, 1941. The smell of scorched linen drifted across the market square of Whitstable, Kent. Eleanor Briggs steadied her bicycle, her knitting bag swinging from the handlebars. The sirens had stopped, but her pulse hadn't. Somewhere beneath the rubble, the baker's wireless was still crackling, faint, coded clicks punching through static. She leaned closer. 3 dots, 2 dashes, another pause. It wasn't random. Her fingers twitched, instinctively counting stitches. Knit, purl, knit. The rhythm matched the pulse of Morse. She tore a scrap of brown paper, marking the sequence in yarn symbols. From the street's end, a home guard corporal shouted for her to move on, but Eleanor's eyes didn't leave the pattern. She had just realized something impossible. Someone was sending field coordinates through knitting motifs. By dusk, the Whitstable Knitting Circle would no longer be a group of housewives. They'd be the newest eyes of Britain's shadow war. The sea air smelled of iron and salt. The coastal town of Whitstable, once known for its oysters, now hummed with the war's mechanical rhythm. Engines, ration lines, and the echo of distant gunfire carried across the channel. Eleanor Briggs, 36, widow of Royal Engineer Thomas Briggs, lost at Dunkirk, had filled her evenings with the same ritual: tea, a cold lamp, and the click of knitting needles. Her circle met every Thursday at Mrs. Gibbons' bakery. They made socks for soldiers, scarves for evacuees, and conversation for sanity. By mid-May 1941, the Ministry of Information announced a new appeal: volunteers to aid domestic communication and morale. Leaflets hinted at secret work, invisible contributions for national defence. None of them knew the term yet, but what was forming beneath the surface was an arm of the Special Operations Executive, the SOE's Home Signals Network, formalised under Directive 12B in April 1941. Mrs. Gibbons joked that maybe they'd knit the Nazis to death. Eleanor didn't laugh. She'd seen patterns before. Patterns in railway timetables her husband had carried, patterns in supply manifests, patterns that meant more than cloth. The bakery smelled of yeast and coal dust. Light filtered through paper-taped windows. Outside, convoys rumbled toward Dover every morning at 6. Eleanor counted them while her needles moved. 17 lorries on Monday, 23 on Thursday. The rhythm of war was visible if you watched closely enough. Records later showed that coastal observation posts logged over 400 civilian reports per week during this period. Most were dismissed, some were not. It came on a Wednesday afternoon in early June. A man in a grey trilby and naval greatcoat entered the bakery, ignoring the queue. He carried no ration book. His shoes were London clean. "Mrs. Eleanor Briggs?" His voice carried the clipped precision of Whitehall. "Depends who's asking," she replied, wiping flour from her hands. He set a sealed envelope on the counter. Inside, a single typewritten line: "The War Office requests your cooperation. Tonight, 8 o'clock. Bring your knitting." At precisely 8 that evening, Eleanor arrived at the back room of the bakery. 2 other women were already there: Alice Harcourt, a school teacher fluent in French, and Ruth Donovan, a telegraph operator turned evacuee host. The man in the trilby introduced himself only as Major Stanton, attached to MI6's Section D, recently absorbed into the SOE. He placed a skein of grey yarn on the table and spread out a chart of Morse code. The room smelled of old bread and lamp oil. "You 3," he said, "are about to knit a message to Paris." A silence hung heavy. Outside, a train whistle cut through the dark. "What sort of message?" Ruth whispered. "One that could save a squadron from being annihilated tomorrow morning." He explained the system methodically, a sequence of knits and purls encoded dots and dashes, Yarn colours marked spacing. Deliberate imperfections mimicked fabric flaws to disguise line breaks. The technique had been tested by Polish resistance networks in late 1940, adapted by SOE's technical section in March 1941. Eleanor's hands were steady. Alice's trembled slightly. Ruth stared at the chart as if memorizing coordinates. "When do we start?" Eleanor asked. "Now." They began with trembling fingers at 20:15 hours. Stanton explained the encoding protocol. Each stitch carried binary weight. A knit stitch represented a dot. A purl represented a dash. Spacing between clusters indicated letter breaks. The message itself was simple, a warning that Luftwaffe bombers had been rerouted toward Dover instead of Portsmouth, based on decoded radio intercepts from Station X at Bletchley Park. At 02:10, a courier would carry their finished scarf to London. There, an SOE operative would photograph it under ultraviolet light, the fibres treated with starch mixed with sodium carbonate, faintly luminescent under specific wavelengths. They worked through the night. Alice murmured French words beneath her breath, testing pronunciation for future drops. Ruth kept time with the metronome of her knitting needles, her telegraph training converting muscle memory into coded rhythm. Eleanor focused on tension. Too tight, and the pattern warped. Too loose, and the message blurred. The room grew colder. Outside, the harbour lapped against wooden pilings. Somewhere in the dark, a cat yowled. By dawn, they handed Stanton the finished wool, still warm from their hands. It measured 42 inches, grey with a single blue stripe, the colour change marking message priority. He nodded once. "If this works," he said, "you'll never be civilians again." That morning, RAF radar stations at Dover and Rye reported a shift in the German formation at 06:33 hours, intercepted exactly where the message predicted. Fighter Command scrambled 8 Spitfires from Manston. 3 bombers were downed before reaching coastal targets. Estimated civilian casualties avoided: 230. The Circle had drawn first blood. The War Office logged it under Auxiliary Communication Trial 12B. Success rate: operational. In the report it was called an experiment. In the bakery it was called proof. By August 1941, the knitting network spanned 6 counties across southern England. The War Office logged it under Domestic Auxiliary 12B, a subsection of SOE's Y network for civilian intelligence gathering. To the public, it remained a women's volunteer effort for soldiers' comforts. In truth, it relayed coded intelligence from coastal observers, resistance radio operators, and downed pilots sheltered by locals. Eleanor's group became central to this lattice. Her contact chain included a fishmonger in Hastings who monitored naval movements, a postmistress in Folkestone who intercepted suspicious telegrams, and a laundry matron who smuggled film canisters in detergent barrels shipped to London twice weekly. Each knitted item carried coordinates, train schedules, or ammunition counts disguised as tension irregularities. Every delivery was logged through coded phrases transmitted via telephone exchanges. Aunt May's pattern fits perfectly meant message received intact. Too tight on the needles meant interception risk detected. Production capacity increased. By September, the network produced an average of 18 coded items per week. Turnaround time from encoding to London delivery, 36 hours. Radio equivalents required 72 hours minimum, with higher interception risk. But as efficiency grew, so did exposure. German counterintelligence in occupied France began reporting unusual textile shipments. MI5 intercepted a report from Abwehr Section 2 in October 1941. Domestic knitting suspected as cover for British communications. Recommend surveillance of charity shipments. The quiet war was about to get loud. Stanton visited the bakery on October 12th. His face was drawn. "They're watching supply routes," he said. "Every package crossing the channel is being logged." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Then we changed the routes." That week, Section K began routing messages through neutral Sweden, disguised as Red Cross relief parcels. Delivery time increased to 5 days. Security improved by 40%. The network adapted. It always did. It was a moonless night on November 8th, 1941, when the Gestapo raided a safe house in Rouen. Inside, they found a half-finished shawl, blue yarn with uneven rows, still pinned to wooden needles. The operative arrested was codenamed Violet, real name Marie Leclerc, a former schoolteacher who had been passing Allied intelligence since June. Back in Whitstable, Eleanor received the coded telegram on November 11th. "Violet is resting." The euphemism hit like artillery. Violet was dead. Interrogated, then executed at Friends Prison on November 10th, 1941. The Gestapo report filed under Case 4471B confirmed torture methods used to extract information. Major Stanton called the circle together on November 13th. The room smelled of damp wool and fear. "The Germans are on to the textile codes," he said. "We are suspending pattern transmissions indefinitely." Eleanor slammed her needles on the table. The sound echoed like a rifle crack. "You can't stop now. You built this around us. We're the only ones who can adapt." The room fell silent. She grabbed a spool of thread and held it up to the lamplight. "We'll weave the codes inside seams. Pattern's not in the stitches. It's in the tension, in the fiber twist. They can tear it apart and never see it." Stanton studied her. "That's not possible." Neither was this. She gestured at the maps, the yarn bundles, the coded notebooks. That night, Eleanor rewrote the system from scratch, inventing a technique using fiber density and twist angles, measured in rotations per centimeter. The code existed in three-dimensional space, invisible to visual inspection, a new encryption language, readable only through micrometer analysis. It would later appear in SOE's Technical Annex D, filed March 1942, under the designation Non-Electronic Covert Transmissions, Type K12. Eleanor Briggs' name never appeared in the document, but the technique did, and it worked. Autumn 1941 brought rain and strategic planning. The RAF was preparing a series of precision strikes against German U-boat pens in Brest, on the Brittany coast. Success hinged on French resistance confirming construction timetables and structural vulnerabilities. But radio channels were compromised. Abwehr direction-finding units had triangulated 3 resistance transmitters in October alone. Eleanor's circle was tasked with delivering data via coded garments shipped through neutral Spain, then carried overland by Basque smugglers into occupied France. The operation was designated Needlepoint, approved by SOE's F section on November 18, 1941. Each woman took on a specialized role. Alice prepared the pattern book, ordinary household designs annotated with invisible numeric keys using lemon juice and phenolphthalein indicators. Ruth modified the wool dye, mixing compounds to reveal hidden outlines under specific pH exposure. Eleanor coordinated the delivery chain through an SOE drop point disguised as a church charity in San Sebastian. The message, once decoded, contained structural analysis of the U-boat pen's western wall. Specifically, the location of expansion joints and rebar spacing that created potential failure points under concentrated bombardment. The garment was a child's cardigan, cream-coloured with blue trim. It travelled by fishing boat to Bilbao on November 24th, then by truck to the Spanish border. A Basque guide carried it across the Pyrenees on November 28th. By December 3rd, it reached a resistance cell in Rennes. By December 8th, the decoded information was confirmed by photographic reconnaissance. On December 12th, 1941, RAF Blenheim bombers from 21 Squadron struck the western wall at 14:22 hours. Bomb tonnage, 3,000 pounds. Photographic reconnaissance at 16 hours confirmed total structural collapse. Estimated delay to U-boat operations, 6 weeks. That night, Eleanor allowed herself one quiet toast with cold tea. The room was dark except for a single candle. "To Violet," she whispered, "and to every stitch they'll never see." Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant engines. The war continued. The needles kept moving. By early 1942, the Circle's effectiveness attracted attention, not from the enemy alone, but from within British intelligence itself. A new liaison arrived in Whitstable on January 14th, Captain Oliver Reeves, attached to MI5's B Division, responsible for counterintelligence and security oversight. He arrived with clipped manners and sharper eyes. He insisted on inspecting every coded piece before dispatch, claiming enhanced security protocols. His questions lingered too long on operational details. His compliments felt rehearsed. Something about him unnerved Eleanor. She noticed he took notes during their briefings but never referenced them later. He asked about contact chains but seemed uninterested in the answers. His uniform was too clean for someone claiming field experience. One evening in late January, Ruth caught him flipping through their cipher notebook during tea break. The book was supposed to be locked in the basement safe. When confronted, he claimed routine security verification. "Just ensuring protocols are maintained," he said, smiling. Days later, their supply courier vanished en route to London. Michael Hastings, a postal clerk who had carried messages for 6 months, disappeared on January 29th between Whitstable and Canterbury. His bicycle was found near the railway crossing. His satchel was gone. 2 weeks after that, on February 12th, a German propaganda broadcast from Radio Paris mocked British housewives playing at spies. The announcer read portions of their last coded message verbatim, including phrasing known only to Section K operatives. Captain Reeves was gone. So were 2 of their field operatives. MI5 later confirmed Reeves as a double agent, recruited by Abwehr in 1940. He was arrested in Portugal on March 3rd, 1942, attempting to board a flight to Lisbon. Eleanor understood what it meant: infiltration, compromise, collapse. She burned every record that night, scattering ashes into the sea from the harbour wall. The wind carried them toward France. "If they find us," she said to Alice and Ruth, "they'll find nothing." But the betrayal left its mark. Whitstable no longer felt like home. It felt like occupied territory. The war pressed on. Winter 1942 bit harder. Rations thinned. Coal became scarce. Morale across southern England waned under the weight of unending alerts and mounting casualties from North Africa and the Far East. Then, in late February 1942, a letter arrived at Eleanor's cottage, written in lemon juice, between grocery lists and knitting patterns. Heating it over a candle flame revealed the message underneath, in Major Stanton's precise handwriting. "Reorganization approved. You are to operate independently as Section K, Domestic Intelligence Branch. Objective: intercept and report coastal sabotage cells. Authority granted under SOE Directive 19C. The Knitting Circle, reborn as Section K, became Britain's only all-female civilian intelligence cell formally recognised under the SOE's domestic arm. Authorisation came from Colin Gubbins, Director of SOE Operations, on February 22nd, 1942. They worked out of the bakery's basement, maps pinned beside flour sacks, yarn bundles labelled by code names instead of colours. Eleanor oversaw encryption development and field coordination. Alice handled liaison with French resistance cells and linguistic analysis. Ruth, now hardened by loss and betrayal, operated a hidden transmitter disguised as a bread oven dial built from salvaged radio components. Production resumed in March. The network expanded to include observers from Dover to Bournemouth. Reports covered German patrol patterns, suspected saboteur landings, and Royal Navy convoy schedules for counterintelligence verification. In the war diary of SOE Home Operations, one entry appeared that spring, dated April 3, 1942. Whitstable Unit, female-led, civilian auxiliary. Exceptional adaptability under compromise conditions. Recommend classification, K12B. Textile-based communication model. Retain operational status until cessation of hostilities. Security clearance, need-to-know basis. The Circle had survived betrayal and exposure. They had rebuilt from ash and suspicion. But the war had yet to test their final pattern. Across the Channel, in occupied France, the resistance was preparing for something larger than anyone imagined, and Section K would be there, needles ready, when the moment came. August 1942 brought rumours through intelligence channels. Something significant was being planned. British and Canadian troops were massing along the southern coast. Equipment moved at night. Security protocols tightened across all communications. Operation Jubilee, later known as the Dieppe Raid, was scheduled for August 19, 1942. The objective: test German coastal defences, gather intelligence, and demonstrate Allied capability for amphibious assault. Planners estimated moderate resistance. Stanton's courier arrived at the bakery on the night of August 17th. His eyes were bloodshot, his uniform dusty from train soot. He carried a sealed envelope marked Urgent Field Intelligence. They need confirmation of German artillery at point 72, he said, spreading a map across the table. Heavy guns, possibly 15th Illy. But radio's gone silent. French resistance is compromised. You're our only line left. Eleanor studied the map. Point 72 was a cliff position overlooking Dieppe's western beach. If German artillery occupied that position, the landing forces would be exposed to enfilade fire with no cover. We'll encode it tonight, she said. Alice traced coordinates from aerial reconnaissance photos, converting geographical data into numeric sequences. Ruth rigged a new fibre-borne encryption using microfilament tension, calibrated by temperature variance. The code would survive rough handling and seawater exposure. They worked until dawn. The finished piece was a child's winter scarf, grey wool with a pattern of deliberate errors that encoded artillery positions, estimated gun caliber, and probable fields of fire. A fisherman named Thomas Garrett ferried it across the Channel on August 18th at 03 hours. He reached the French coast by 07:30, delivered the package to a resistance courier, and returned before German patrol boats completed their morning sweep. The message reached Canadian 2nd Division headquarters at 23 hours on August 18th. Too late to alter the overall plan, but in time to divert one landing craft from the heaviest artillery zone. The raid launched at 05 hours on August 19th. It failed catastrophically. Of the 5,000 Allied troops who landed at Dieppe, over 3,000 were killed, wounded, or captured within 9 hours. The Royal Regiment of Canada suffered 68% casualties. The Essex Scottish Regiment was nearly destroyed. German defenders, forewarned and heavily entrenched, delivered overwhelming fire from positions exactly where Section K's message had indicated. The one landing craft diverted from Point 72, carrying 32 men from the Cameron Highlanders, survived the initial assault. They withdrew at 11 hours with photographic intelligence of German beach obstacles and defensive positions. That intelligence later guided engineers designing the Mulberry Harbours and beach clearance protocols for D-Day 22 months later. Eleanor never called it victory, she called it proof that intelligence saved lives, even when operations failed. Proof that the work mattered, but the aftermath broke many. Ruth, racked with guilt over the raid's losses, wanted to quit. "We save one boat and lose thousands. What are we doing, Ellie?" Eleanor answered quietly, staring out at the harbour. "The same as every soldier. Surviving today so tomorrow still exists." Tragedy came closer in September. A Gestapo intelligence summary recovered from a captured officer at Dieppe included the code name K-12B. Somehow their network had been exposed again, possibly through documents seized during the raid itself. Within weeks, MI5 ordered a communications blackout on Section K. No more coded garments, no more transmissions, no more contact with French resistance cells. The directive came from Guy Liddell, head of MI5's B Division, on September 8, 1942. Yet Eleanor refused to disband entirely. "If we stop completely, everything we did vanishes into rumour and classified files. No one will know we existed." She began training new women in secret: widows, evacuees, former postal clerks, teachers, teaching them encryption through knitting patterns hidden in church charity drives and women's voluntary service collections. It was dangerous, unauthorized, potentially treasonous, but it kept the web alive. And in war, survival required risks that peacetime could never justify. The needles kept moving, even in silence. By late 1942, the tide was turning, though slowly. The Allies held North Africa after Operation Torch in November. Soviet forces encircled the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. In Britain, planners began serious preparation for the invasion of Europe, an operation that would eventually become Overlord. Intelligence from inside France became vital. The French resistance, though fractured and heavily infiltrated, continued to provide reports on German troop movements, fortification construction, and railway schedules. One night in December 1942, Eleanor received an unsigned parcel through the postal service. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a French tricolour ribbon, hand-stitched with the word Merci in blue thread. It came from Rouen, Violet's hometown. Someone out there was still fighting. Someone remembered. That same week, fragments of Section K's encoded patterns resurfaced in SOE field manuals circulated among resistance couriers in Belgium, Holland, and Normandy. What began in a Kent bakery was now aiding operations across occupied Europe. The technique had spread through resistance networks, adapted and refined by operatives who had never met Eleanor Briggs but had learned her methods from captured documents and trained agents. Eleanor's core technique, fibre code modulation based on tension variance and twist density, was officially designated Textile Communication System Type K12 in SOE Technical Manual 14, published January 1943. The manual noted, "Suitable for high-security environments where radio transmission risks unacceptable exposure, encoding capacity, moderate, detection resistance, excellent." Her knitting circle had become a blueprint for covert messaging, as secure in certain contexts as early radio ciphers, and far more difficult to intercept or decode without specialized equipment. At the bakery that winter, Eleanor stood by the window, watching snow settle on the harbour. Ships moved in convoy formation toward the horizon. Gulls circled the fishing boats. She whispered to no one, "We were never soldiers, but we fought just the same." Outside, the war continued. Inside, the needles moved steadily, maintaining their rhythm. The work was never finished. It simply changed form. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Church bells rang across Britain for the first time since 1939. Whitstable erupted in colour. Flags, bunting, and crowds gathering in the market square where, 4 years earlier, Eleanor had heard the coded broadcast from beneath the rubble. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, knitting one last square, red, white, and blue, in a simple garter stitch. No code, no hidden message, just wool. Major Stanton appeared at her door that afternoon, older and thinner, his uniform bearing ribbons from campaigns across Europe. But he was smiling. "They're declassifying parts of the network," he said. "The Prime Minister's office wants to formally commend Section K for contributions to intelligence operations." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "No names, no parades. We were invisible, and that's how we'll stay." He left an envelope on her table. Inside, a single sheet of heavy paper bearing the official seal of 10 Downing Street. The citation, signed by Winston Churchill himself on May 5, 1945, read, "For acts of intelligence and courage rendered in silence under conditions of exceptional risk, contributing materially to the defence of the realm and the success of Allied operations, recognition granted posthumously to personnel of Section K, Domestic Intelligence Branch, Special Operations Executive." She never showed it to anyone. She pinned it beneath her sewing kit, between photographs of her late husband Thomas and the first pattern book they had used in June 1941. That evening she burned the last of the coded yarn, watching the fibres curl and vanish in the hearth. The ashes floated like snow, carried up the chimney and out into the spring air. The war was over, the work was done, but the pattern remained. Invisible, woven into history, known only to those who had carried needles instead of rifles and fought a war that no one would remember. In the records it was logged as auxiliary intelligence. In the bakery it was called survival. The Cold War had begun by 1947 and the world had nearly forgotten the quiet wars of the past. Documents were sealed, personnel scattered. The urgency of survival gave way to the bureaucracy of peace. Eleanor lived alone by the sea, her hands still restless with the habit of pattern and precision. She knitted for herself now, scarves, blankets, simple things without hidden meaning, but sometimes her fingers fell into old rhythms, encoding messages to no one. A young journalist from the Daily Telegraph came to Whitstable in 1953, researching women's wartime contributions for a retrospective series. He noticed the framed photograph on Eleanor's mantel. 4 women standing outside a bakery, knitting needles in hand, dated 1942. "You all must have made quite a few scarves for the troops," he said, scribbling notes. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Only a few, but they reach farther than you'd think." He didn't understand. He thanked her and left. Years later, in 1977, a researcher at the British War Museum discovered a file in the newly declassified SOE archives. It was labelled Section K, Whitstable Women, Textile Communication Network, Operational 1941-1943. The file contained operational summaries, authorization documents, and photographic evidence. Success rate, 82%. Strategic impact, substantial, particularly in coastal intelligence and cross-channel communication under radio blackout conditions. Included in the file was the original pattern book, faded wool samples attached to yellowed pages, invisible ink residue still detectable under ultraviolet analysis. At the bottom of the final page, one line was handwritten in Eleanor's precise script. A nation is not defended only by those who carry rifles, but by those who carry needles steady enough to save lives. Eleanor Briggs died in 1968 at the age of 63 in a cottage overlooking the harbour. Her obituary mentioned volunteer work during the war, nothing more. The story of a housewife's knitting circle, when ordinary women armed with yarn, code and courage, became one of Britain's quietest victories. It remained classified for 30 years, but the pattern endured. It always does.